we're talking about mekah taut, the possibility to be mevatel kiddushin l'mafreya, but not through afge'inhu, right, which we discussed, but rather through a determination that there was not, that the kiddushin themselves were done under false pretenses, and since kiddushin requires dat, the dat was not there, the dat was b'taut, and that characterizes a mekach taut, and therefore the kiddushin should be batel l'mafreya. Okay? By way of an introduction and putting the principle out there, so the first source we have here is the Rambam Hilchot Mechira, right? Perek Tet Vav, okay? Halacha Gimel, right? V'chein hamocher l'chaveiro karka o eved o behema o shar metaltalin v'nitza b'mekach mum shelo yadabo halokeach. That's very important. Machziro afilu la'achar kama shanim shezeh mekach ta'utu. Okay? So there was some pgam, there was a mum. Okay? What constitutes a mum, we'll see. Okay? In the context of Dinei Mamonot, what constitutes a mum. Okay? V'hu shelo yishtamesh b'mekach achar sheyeda b'mum. Provided that you don't use the merchandise after you find out that there was the mum. Val im nishtamesh bo achar shera'a mum, harei ze machal ve'eno yachol lahachzir. That's a very interesting halacha. That if we find out that the person was mochel, there's a possibility to be mochel la'achar ma'aseh. You didn't know there was a mum at the time of the kinyan. You found out about the mum afterwards, but you accept it. Okay? So that possibility exists, and the mekach then is kayam. Okay? So let's put that part of it in parentheses for now. Maybe we'll talk about it later. Okay? So we have this principle of mekach ta'ut. If there's something unknown which was wrong at the time, and then you find out afterwards, the mekach is batel. Okay? Kol sheskimu alav halacha hey. Kol sheskimu alav b'nei medina shehu mum shemachzir bo mekach zeh machzirin. So what determines what a mum is? Minhag medina. Right? What's considered a mum? Right? That means obviously it's relative. In some places, you know, if you order a car with the sport hubcaps and it comes with the regular hubcaps, so then that's a mum that you can't live with, right? In some places, in some neighborhoods, right? Like, how are you going to show your face, right, with the wrong type of hubcaps? But in other places, it's not really a mum. So then you can say, look, the mekach is kayam, but you ordered these type of hubcaps and those, so they have to provide you with what you ordered, or they have to pay the difference. But the mekach is fundamentally kayam. Okay? Well, that's very important. That opens up the possibility that what constitutes a mum is relative. If it's I will add that it's. I think that it's axiomatic that if it's relative to place, it could also be relative to time. Okay? Could be 1,000 years ago this wasn't considered a mum, and today it is considered a mum, and vice versa. 1,000 years ago something might have been considered a mum, and today it's not considered a mum. V'chol she'eskimu alav she'eino mum, harei ze'eino machzir bo ela im piresh. And that's where the issue of Tanai comes in. We saw, and this is going to be important to remember. Let's finish the sentence. First, shekol nosei v'notein stam al minhag hamedina hu somech. Okay? So we saw this before, that there's a gradation of, let's put it this way, disappointments in a transaction, right? You can have something which is a mekach taut, which is what we're talking about now, is a fundamental lack of dat, because I thought I was buying one thing and what I received is so flawed that there's no dat at all. There's something else where you have to express yourself, it's something which is somewhat subjective. You have to say beforehand that I'm only doing this under these circumstances or under this condition, where you don't need Tanaim. It's enough just to express yourself because there's some sort of umdana that it makes sense that that's why you're doing what you're doing. But since there's two sides to the transaction, you have to express yourself. And then there's another level where you actually have to say a t'nai, where it's not enough just to say I'm only selling my house because Jews are feeling uncomfortable in England, so I'm selling my house in Hendon. That maybe then maybe it's not enough. Right? Maybe you have to say I'm only selling my house because some world leaders won't acknowledge that there's anti-Semitism at all. So I have to make that a t'nai because you have to make it more explicit, right? So there are different levels of expressing dat, where when you talk about ta'ut, that's kol ha'nosei v'noten al minhagim midinyan somech. There's an anan sahade. You don't have to express anything. It's, of course, if I buy a car, I want the car to have an engine. If the car doesn't have an engine, that's a mekach ta'ut. Okay? Halacha vav. Kol lokech stam eino lokech el hadavar hashalem mikol mum. V'im piresh hamocher v'omer al menat she'ein ata chozer alai b'mum. Harei ze chozer ad shefaresh hamum. It's not. You can't say that I'm selling this but it's blind, right? You have to say what the mum is. Okay? Okay. So this is in general in Dinei Mamonot, the halachot of mekach ta'ut. Okay. Now, we know that you need da'at. Oh, now we're accompanied by music here. We know that you need da'at for kiddushin as well, right? So the Gemara talks about in Bava Kama the possibility of declaring kiddushin mekach ta'ut. Now you could talk about the husband, the ta'ut of the husband, of the man, right? He was mekadesh the woman. He didn't know that she had mumin. Or you could talk about the woman. She accepted the kiddushin and she didn't know that he had a mum, right? But it should be analogous, which is what the Gemara says, except the circumstances are a little different. Okay? Ela me'ata yivama, this is Gemara Bava Kama, me'ata yivama shenafla lefnei mukashchin tipok below chalitza. If the yavam was a mukashchin, so we say that daida dahachi lo kitcha atzma. She never accepted kiddushin. She would have known that the brother of the husband has a mukashchin. She wouldn't have accepted the kiddushin. So therefore, it's a kiddushay ta'ut. Okay, vatna. So what do we answer? Hatam anan sahadi demenach naichala b'chol dehu kireish lakish. Damar reish lakish tav lemeitav tandu milemeitav armu. Okay, so the fundamental assumption of the Gemara is that you would have been able to apply the principle of mekach ta'ut with regards to the woman's ta'ut, had it not been for another principle which is introduced on a sort of on a secondary level of tav l'meitav tandu l'meitav armalu, that we say that it isn't a ta'ut, that we assume, and it's a very strong language, right? Anan sahade is a very strong language, that she accepts any mum, she at least accepts this situation. The menach nechala b'choldehu. It's very severe language. The tav l'meitav tandu milemeitav armalu. Okay, women get married for any number of reasons. They want to be married more than they are afraid of the risk of falling before a yavam who's a mukashchin. Okay, so you can't say that such a situation is a mekach ta'ut. Does this mean that there's never a case of mekach ta'ut, that you always say tav l'meitav tandu l'meitav armalu? So that's not clear. Okay, so that we'll see what the various Rishonim did. Okay, so al panav, even though we have the principle that you should be able to apply mekach ta'ut in kiddushin, in the case of the woman, because of Tav L'Meitav Tandu L'Meitav Ormalu, the language of the Menach Nechala B'chol Dehu, should rather have anyone, so that seems to take away that possibility.
The fact that there's not something directly wrong with the man that she's married, it's like a secondary possibility. It's not
that's
a problem
true. That's
with
right.
her.
That seems like a bigger difference.
What?
That seems like a bigger issue to me. Is not that it wasn't, is it then they're saying, but like, it makes it a lot harder to say that she didn't want to be married to the first guy who died.
Right,
so
I
it just
understand.
sort of, it's...
Look, and on the other hand, they're not even willing to do it to be matir a yavam al shuk. We're not talking about being matir the eshet ish. She's not an eshet ish anymore because her husband died. So there's an isur yavam al shuk, which is an isur lo ta'aseh. It's not an isur eshet ish, and even that they're not willing to be matir. Okay.
Except that the brother isn't part of the...
What?
The brother is not part of mekah. That's not who she is.
But the assumption is, the question is whether you have certain circumstances where you can assume that if it wasn't for Tav L'Meitav Tandu, and the Isha accepts Kol Dehu, were it not for that, she would not have agreed to marry this guy. Okay?
Is the assumption
Yeah.
she didn't know yet Shrin, or the assumption she didn't think about that her husband would die without kids? But it's funny because
The assumption is that she
if
thought
anyone
about
I understand that was the
God
point.
forbid, they'd have to do Khalit like Riba, and they wouldn't have wanted to get involved.
Well, that
The
is something
assumption is that she
that
thought
today
about
maybe
both.
you could say, right? I didn't know that he had a brother, right? And today, um,
But I
But-
don't exactly get what the
the mech ta'ut is that he's a mukat shchin.
meaning that she didn't have that small piece of information.
Right, right. There was a famous, I don't know how many
I
of
thought
you
the
are aware of
assumption
this.
here is that she had both. She did have the information and she still chose to marry.
No, then of course it's not a ta'ut,
Oh,
right?
okay.
There was a very big controversy in the early 70s or the late 60s? When was it? There was an RCA convention where Emanuel Rackman set up a Beit Din, and he wanted to be matir a gunot based on mekach ta'ut. And he said, but the Gemara says, Tav L'Meitav Tandu L'Meitav Ormalu. He said that's not true anymore, right? I heard this on tape. It was before I was, before my years in YU. I heard it on tape. The Rav went super ballistic. He said that the chazakot that Chazal have. Are you familiar with this machloket? Nobody's here familiar with it?
Well, it's
like what?
about
Yeah.
about many
Yeah,
things.
no, but it has to do with the chazakot. Do you know what I'm talking about? Are you familiar with the machloket? Nobody here knows what the machloket between the Rav and Emmanuel
Well, I
Rackman.
assume that
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were sure about that, meaning
Well, I'll tell you what the Rav said because I heard him on tape. I mean, it's in writing, but I was looking for it on the internet today to see if I could find the recording. I would have brought it in, but I couldn't find it. I found a lot of written references to it. The Rav said that the chazakot, that like Tav L'Meitav Tandu L'Meitav Ormalu, are essential. In other words, they're Chazal's or the Torah's observation on the nature of women that goes back to Ma'aseh Bereshis ve'elishech chukatech, and it's not something that can change. They're metaphysical determinations. It doesn't change. The Rav went crazy. The words that he said you might as well. So all of Even Ezra is built on it. You might as well burn the Torah. Those were his words. Okay, you might as well set fire to the Torah,
it's just
right?
so unreal.
And the rest of history was Emanuel Rackman left America and he became president of Bar-Ilan University. I think partially because of that. But
It's just such a
it's so.
hard
Just
to
give you. I'm going to
like
skip.
even
I know.
respect it. I'm sorry.
Rav Lichtenstein said. I remember Rav Lichtenstein once said to me, "He doesn't know what drove the Rav so crazy about that." But if you take a look in the last tshuva that I gave you from Rav Moshe, right? The situation here was that a woman, after she got married, found out that her husband was a homosexual and he was having homosexual affairs. Okay? And he was homosexual before and he's homosexual. It was, so the question is whether they could be mevatel, whether they can mevatel, but say it's a mekach ta'ut. So we'll talk about.
Why not a get?
But the guy maybe didn't want to give a get. He wasn't around anymore. It's always better to get a get if you can. But the question is whether you could be matir from mekah taut. So he said. So the person that asked him the question sent him something in writing. V'nei ra'iti et kuntraso b'masher rotzeh lechalek ben dorot elu ledorot hakadmonim. ממה שרואים שאנשים בדורות אלו מקפידים עוד יותר במומין דהאיש ממה שמקפידים האנשים במומי הנשים. Right? Basically, common sense argument that it's not, even if in those days you could have said the isha b'chol duhu neichelu v'tav l'meitiv tandu. In other words, that's an expression of the fact that women were very dependent, and in society, if they weren't married, they were nowhere. Okay? So a woman would get married, wants to get married under even on most extreme circumstances. So that's not true anymore. When is this tshuva from? Do I have the date here? I didn't print the date. Oh, Tafshin Lamed Chet. That 1978. Okay? So it's not true anymore. So Rav Moshe does not blow a gut. Right? He says, Hinei af sheshayach lomar svara kazo. Right? Maybe. And then he goes back and forth whether you could say it based on the Gemara. Right? But he's certainly willing to entertain the possibility that the chazaka could change. The question is when the Gemara says the chazaka of Tav L'Meit of Tandu, what were the kpedot of the women in those days? And can you compare the kpedot of the women in those days to the kpedot of the women these days? And that's his discussion. He's just saying, well, let's see if it changed or not. He shows that women were makpidot back then also from different Gemarot. Right? And if that's the case, then the chazaka would still be valid, because when Chazal said it, the women that we were talking about were similar enough to the women that, quote unquote, that we're talking about. But he's open to the discussion, right? None of this, chazakot which are etched in stone from Sheish Mei Bereshis. It was very what?
The fact that what he was saying though about it, it does make the whole house of cards fall down a little bit. Like when we were saying before about all the stuff with Ben Adam Yosef
Yeah.
We're like, well, maybe that's not true. Then you have all these other things that were built on that assumption.
Right.
Like
so
when you take the assumption out, things do fall apart. But
yeah, because
that's reality.
the law changes when circumstances change.
Right.
Right. That's alphabet.
Also, we want the law to reflect reality.
The law has to reflect reality. Look. Okay, so that has to do with the philosophy of halacha. The Rav's approach in general is the more detached it is from reality, the more that you see it's from God. That's the Litvish approach, right? The law is this theoretical thing which is self-justifying. It's Platonic in nature. It's self-justifying, and in a sense, the more that it's anti-common sense, the more it shows that it's from God. Okay,
this is a statement about reality. He's clearly making a statement about reality in the Gemara when he makes
You're preaching to the choir here. Okay? Alright. So we have this Gemara about Tav L'Meit of Tandu, which throws a monkey wrench into the possibility of being Mevatel Kiddushin based on mekah taut, unless you're willing to say that the Chazaka doesn't apply anymore. Okay? But so let's put that aside for now. Okay? Now we have another Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Ayin Gimel Mid Bet. I'm sorry, Ketubot. The Mishnah is on Daf Ayin Bet. The Mishnah says as follows: "This is Mekadesh al Tnai, okay? Hamikadesh et ha'isha al menat she'ein aleha nidarim." Okay, that's considered a mum. V'nimtzu aleha nidarim. Right? The man thought he was marrying a woman that was free to do whatever, and it turns out there are all these things that, she doesn't need kebrachs on Pesach. I wouldn't have married her if she didn't need kebrachs on Pesach, right? Or other such nidarim, okay? V'nimtzu al nidarim einam mikudeshet. Right? She davens mincha, okay? Einam mikudeshet. Kinsas. What?
That's not a nagger, that's a
okay. I don't. You can't heckle me every time. Okay.
Give good, realistic
Fine.
If you don't want to be heckled, don't say things.
Rachel, send me an email. Okay. Nimtzu al nidarim einam mikudeshet. Kinsas stam v'nimtzu al nidarim teitzei below k'tuba. If he didn't make a t'nai, right? We said that sometimes there are things that you don't want to be as part of the transaction, quote unquote, But if you don't say anything, so they're not part of the transaction. If you wanted to introduce your own shigonot or your own preferences, you have to say, right? And you have to make a t'nai. So if you didn't make a t'nai, if the man did not make a t'nai about nidarim, so there she is mekudeshet, but tetzei l'lo k'tuba. She loses a k'tuba. Okay? So now, why? Good. So hold on 1 second. Al-menat she'ein ba-mumin v'nimtzeu ba-mumin eina mekudeshet. Kinsa stam v'nimtzeu ba-mumin tetzei b'lo k'tuba. Okay. Now, so the Gemara asks why. What's the distinction between ketubah and the kiddushin itself? Okay, because if there's no ketubah, there was some sort of mekah taut. He was mitchayev in the ketubah. He didn't know that she had nidarim. He didn't know that she had whatever mumin she has. Right. So he was mitchayev in the false pretenses. So his chayvut to the ketubah is a mekah taut. So if the chayvut to the ketubah is a mekah taut, why isn't the kiddushin themselves a mekah taut? See, we have two answers. Okay? So, Gemara, let's see the question. So the Gemara is medayek. Ketubah u'delo baya. Hagita baya. She needs a get. The kiddushin are not kiddushei ta'ut. It's just you're telling me that the ketubah is b'ta'ut. Umay shna ketubah u'delo baya. Why doesn't she lose the ketubah? Why does she lose the ketubah? The Amar efshi be'eisha nidranit. I didn't marry a woman who has nidarim. Okay? Ihachi get nami lo tebai. So it should be mekach taut on the kiddushin themselves. Amar Rabba tzricha get midivreihem. It's midrabana. Okay? So that means again, in principle, there's no difference between ketubah and the kiddushin themselves. But Chachamim didn't like the situation. She isha yotzeit lelo get. She was known to be an eshet ish, and now you're saying she's not an eshet ish anymore. So people are not going to look into and read the fine print of how it is that she's not an eshet ish anymore. They'll just know that she was. We were at the chasana, and now she's walking around. She's not an eshet ish anymore, and there was no get. So Chachamim required a get. Okay.
Why is one case different than? Why wouldn't they require it in both cases then?
Which both cases? Which case?
He made the t'nai. He didn't find.
When he makes the t'nai, so we know he made a t'nai, so it's clear that Almanach, he was mekadesh or this t'nai.
She was married and now she's walking around now.
But the people know he made a t'nai, but here he didn't make the t'nai, so then they don't understand.
Is the t'nai dafka public?
The t'nai is public, yeah.
It's
the t'nai is public, yeah.
It's stated out loud under
right. It would be. There have to be aid in.
Said the thing about
right?
And then
we talked
later
about
on
this.
They see her walking around and they think, oh, it must be she had nidarim. That's why she's not married anymore.
Yeah, they made it a t'nai, and then they'll make it paskin or whatever, right? But if there's no t'nais, then they won't understand. So they required. Otherwise, every kiddushin al t'nai, when we say she's not mukdash, would require a get, right?
We don't. I'm not understanding actually.
So here he made it. If you made it t'nai, the t'nai was not fulfilled. But if you didn't make it t'nai, it's not. People don't see the ta'ut. People know about the t'nai. People don't see the ta'ut. Okay. So in terms of dinei mamonot, so she loses the ketubah, but we want midrabanan to require a get. Why don't we require a get in every situation? Because here he wants not to be mikudeshet. He wants her to leave. So of course he'll write a get midrabanan. Right? There's no problem with igun if you mitakein that you require a get. Midrabanan. Okay? Let's continue.
Also, there's also here she withheld information.
Why is the
it's not necessarily even punitive. It's not even punitive necessarily.
Right, but it's not.
Not receiving your ketubah is not punitive.
No.
It's not the same as.
He was mekadesh under certain. He was mitchayev to the ketubah.
He just mekadesh them. He didn't ask her. I don't understand why she's being punished. That's the part I don't get. He didn't say anything. He didn't say nidarim.
But that's considered. That's considered. But so that goes back. That's considered a ta'ut. It's a legitimate thing to say. Just like the Rambam said in Hilchot Mechira that kol mekadesh adat min haga midina mekadesh. So it's general. We understand the person's. It's a little hard to understand the type of hakpada, right? But we understand the person's hakpada that he doesn't want a woman who has nidarim on her, right? So that's self-explanatory. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that.
And because they know that it was her requirement to have said it, and therefore she gets punished without it.
Again, I don't think it's punitive. There's just simply no dot. In effect, she's punished because of it, and she did mislead him, but I don't think you have to say it's punitive. He was mekadesh into these with dot of X and not dot of Y. And it turns out, why? Whether she knows about it, she doesn't know about it.
Is there a time limit on this?
Savar v'kibel, right? If he continues to be married after he finds out, okay? Hold on.
The
How
opposite
much
way?
time?
Okay, I don't want to get into the... If he finds out, then afterwards... there's a steer in the Rambam about this. So let's, on your question, just leave that for a second, okay? All right, let me just finish the Gemara, okay? So that's Rabbah, that the require a get midrabbana. V'chein amar Rav Chizda tzricha get midivreim. Rava amar Tana sipuke misafkale gabe mamona lekula gabe isura b'chumra. He says it's a safek. What's the safek? The point that we're talking about, namely whether it's legitimate to say efshi b'isha nadranit. How much of kpeda is it? Is that considered taut or is it not considered taut? So he says that that we're misupakim whether that's considered a taut. Okay? So since we're misupakim whether that's considered a taut, so with regards to dinei mamonot, we say hamotzi mechaver of araya, who's muchzak in the money, he's muchzak in the money, right? And with regards to isurim, we have to be machmir. So she's a suffik eshet ish. So the ksuba she loses, but she needs a get. Okay, mitzada safek. Okay, so according to this, there's no gzeira d'Rabbanan here. It's a safek. In any case, the principle is bein l'rabba, bein l'rava, is that there is a possibility of mekach ta'ut. Okay? Talking about the husband's side, right? The husband thought when he was mekadesh, he thought X. There was a mum. Right? In this case, the mum is nidarim, or it could be any other sort of mum. The question is how, how big or significant the mum has to be. But if there's a mum, so we would say the kiddushin abetelim. There may be certain cases where we're not sure if the kiddushin abetelim is, we're not sure how severe the mum is. So then we'll say, then we'll be machmir in all directions. Okay? But we see that the principle of mekach taut exists.
What I'm not understanding, I'm really sorry. He didn't mention anything about Nadarim. He finds out she has Nadarim and he doesn't want that. Why don't we just say, okay, you can divorce her? Why? I feel like
it's considered a fatal flaw in the transaction.
Right. She doesn't deserve.
It's as if he was mekadesh her, and
she's not being punished, but she is being punished because if she was divorced, she would get her ketubah.
She is being punished.
She is being punished for saying that.
It could be. It's just a lack of da'at on his side. Take a different case. He's mekadesh the woman. Right? There's a case the opposite way. He never met her, right? He's mekadesh her, and then he finds out she's blind. That's a tshuva with the other way around. It's not her fault, but he had no doubt to mekadesh a woman who was blind. That you can make a statement that that's a mekach taut. Right? The other way around, they talked about it. The woman didn't see the man. It turned out the man was blind. So they discussed whether that's considered mekach taut. It's nobody's fault. But then he didn't have doubt to mekadesh a woman under those circumstances.
Isn't there any sort of assumption that you're going to have checked things out? Meaning,
on
one hand, you're right. If you buy a car and there's no engine, it's a mekach taut. On the other hand, if you're spending a lot of money on a car, you take it to a mechanic and you check it out and you get information. And we assume that if you went through with it, you did your due diligence.
Now we're dealing with the... Yes, hold on one second. Let me just answer. We're talking about the principle of the possibility of mekach taut. Whether we can say under certain circumstances, we can assume what's called savar v'kibel, that you can't say you didn't know about it, right? So that, the Gemara talks about different circumstances of... that the man is bodek, certain types of mumim, right? He goes to her krovim, they look at her when she goes to the mikveh, right? He sends his mother to the mikveh to check her out, right? There are all sorts of things. Right? So those are things. You can't say you didn't know. You can't say you didn't know. We expect that you checked it out. Right? But that's on the level of being mivarer, right? But in principle, right, if you in fact didn't know, right, so then you could say it's a mekach taut, right? And then we go back to the question of how severe the mum is, right? But in principle, just as you have in Dinei Mamonot, in mekah, you can have a mekah taut. So too in ishut, you can have a mekah taut. On the woman's taut is more problematic because we have this principle of tav l'meit of tandu, l'meit of ormalu, that we say that for a woman, even though there's a mum, we say she accepts the mum. But that's not a reason she wouldn't have gotten married. Okay? That's just in terms of the Gemarot. Okay? We'll see what happens in the Shutim.
Can I
Okay?
ask you just one more question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This idea of tablet, what I don't understand about it is, clearly the case is arising because the woman says, this thing is bothering me so much I don't want to be married. So then what? I don't
But
know
at the
what-
time, she would have agreed to be married.
At the
As
time.
At the time of the Kiddushin, so she's an so
Meaning
she's,
she didn't.
they didn't know. She didn't know, but she would have agreed at the time. And now she's saying she doesn't agree. All sorts of things that people after a while, they say, I can't put up with this anymore. She snores. I thought I could live with it. I can't live with it, right?
No, but
So,
that's something different because that's the time, because it's from the first time that you realize that someone
Right, but
snores.
saying
As
she
opposed
didn't
to
know
like
about
after
something.
years
Now
of it.
she
you're
finds
fine,
out.
like,
At the
"Yes."
moment when she finds out, she says, this is not acceptable.
so we don't
Well, I
believe her.
uh,
We don't believe her. Anan
So here's a
Sahade.
woman saying something about what she feels, and we say, no, we have a chazak
But at
about
the
what
time-
women feel.
That's right.
I don't
It's
understand this.
It's not considered from the way Chazal analyzed the intentions or the desires or the dot of women. They would not be mevatel kiddushin based on this. Afterwards, so this woman is making an excuse. She wants out. Good, so let her get a get. So there might be situations where this type of mum justifies kfiyat haget, right? Kofin lahotzi, right? The problem arises when you can't be kofin lahotzi. The husband ran away, etc. So let's take a look at the shutim, okay? So first we'll see the shutim that really minimize altogether, and a lot of it goes back to this shoot of the Tashbetz, right? From Chachmei Sfarad. He lived in the 14th century, 14th going into the 15th century. So listen to this case and let's see what he says. The arguments here are some of them are a little strange. Okay, we'll see. Maaseh ira be'eretz Italia, be'ish echad. We got the names here. Okay, Shmo Yitzchak bar Yechiel, shenasa isha shma Beladona, bat Rabbi Yechiel. V'achar nisuim b'shmona chodashim. 8 months later, amdu bedin. Marat firna almanat Rabbi Yechiel. So the father-in-law died in the meantime. The mother-in-law was still alive, much to the chagrin of the husband. Okay? Hanizkar, Yitzchak Hanizkar, and she stood at Din Torah. The mother-in-law sued the husband. V'ta'ana Yisha'en al beito v'lo ya'amod. The pasuk from Eov. It's a euphemism. Yisha'en al beito v'lo ya'amod means he doesn't have koach gavra. Okay? V'lo ya'amod. You understand what it means, okay? So he can't complete the biyah. Okay? So they want to claim it's a mekach ta'ut. So what happened? Tana yisha'en al beito v'lo ya'amod v'shtadlu b'nei adam b'kama drachim b'neihem. Right, so they tried to come to some sort of agreement. Kedei shelo yavo yedei gerushin. Right, try to make shalom. All the well-intentioned peacemakers. Okay. Ubetoch hadvarim barach Yitzchak hanizkar meoto makom lemakom acher. Okay. Okay. So what does he say? Odreiti bekutus hazeh atzmo shu omer she'afilu kiddushim midrabanan leka. So the person that wrote said that it's the Kedushin of B'Teilim, Vatam Bazeh. Now listen to the reason that was given. It sounds very strange, but I think maybe we can make some sense of that. The person that wanted to be Matir said as follows. Dimi Sefer K'tuba Nilmod Shekach Katavla. It's one of the Tanai Ksuba that he has to give Ona, right? So the truth is it's a chiyuv in the Torah, but it's written in the Ksuba. Ve'eo lotichi ka'orech kol ara. Right? Okay, so it's like Mekadesh al Tanai. Because anything's written in the Ksuba. Well, I don't know if anything written in the Ksuba. This is the question, right?
We're not arguing over the facts. He was motive of the facts.
Yes. Okay? The Gam Ze'ein Maspik Lahatiri Shazo. Listen to why he doesn't like this. The Shema Achar Kiddushin nolad lo inyan zeh. Right? You don't know when he he lost the kol gavra. Ube'eit ha-kiddushin ra'ui ha'el lekach. Right? So there was no mum b'shat kiddushin. Okay? So you don't know. That's the first question. V'od, listen to this one. She'im eino hayom ra'ui lekach, efshar she ra'ui lachar zman. So maybe he could be healed. So then what does that do? But in the meantime, he's not. That's very strange. You see, his whole approach is going to be not to allow bittul kiddushin. Okay? But this type of argument, well, you're right. Even if we assume that at the time he didn't have koach gavra, and now he doesn't have koach gavra, but maybe he will have koach gavra. So then what does that mean? But there still was a mum, so maybe the mum will get better, but right now there's a mum. So he thinks that if it's something which maybe will get better, so it doesn't constitute enough of a mum. Right? So certainly we can imagine certain things that everybody finds out things about their spouse after they get married, right? So, but they're not everything. There's pretty. Yes, I understand, but you have to draw them. You have to figure out where the line is. Okay. All right. So that's one argument, and then he says he goes on to say that it's not considered a mum. And among his arguments are, then he says maybe she knew about it, okay? Then he says, Ve'im tomar, 5 lines to the bottom, Shegam kiddushav b'telim, this is a strange argument. Suppose you would be vatal the kiddushin, Atam avkiya kama nashim ba'alehem. No. Okay? So, okay. In other words, he's saying that as a public policy, he's sort of ignoring the facts of this case. And so you're right, even if you say that it's considered a mum, and she didn't know about it, and it's not going to get better, or even it is going to get better, it's still considered a mum, right? And ra'ui levatel the kiddushin, you undermine marriages in general if you're going to be mevatel these kiddushin based on taut, then there'll be a lot of ta'uyot. Okay? Umekarin kamek tubot beshuka. Ubevadai ilu yad'a kein lo intzabale. V'od the sefer ketubah. Now this is the one, I think, solid argument that he has. You can't say that when it says v'il lo tichi ka'orach kol ara, that's kimikadesh al t'nai. Why? The sefer ketubah lo nichtav elachar kiddushin ukvar nitkadeshet below t'nai zeh. V'od she'ein ma shekatuv b'sefer ketubah t'nai meforashi yitbatlu ha'kiddushin ela shu mechayiv atzmo b'ma shechivato Torah she'rak sutav onata lo yigra ha'im ne'enas v'lo kiyein rachmana patre shem lo tomar kein im kein bo v'nomar shemi she'eno yachol lefarnes tishto teitzei below get sharei misefer ha'ketubah nilmod shektiv ba ba'ani azon v'farnes otach. Right? Yeah. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Give me 1 second. 1 second. So he's saying that mitzad the ketubah, you can't be mati. Okay? He thinks mitzad ta'ut itself, he thinks by the arguments that he raised earlier that you can't be matir, because he thinks it's not a ta'ut, and you can't say that it's a tanai. Now I think that that's really not so simple, because this is why it was important to do Mishpatei HaTanaim a few months ago. When we say that you need Mishpatei HaTanaim, you don't always need Mishpatei HaTanaim. That's what we talked about a few minutes ago. Sometimes you don't have to say anything, that's Mekach Ta'ut. Sometimes it's self-evident enough that as long as you say you're makpid, you don't have to say it b'lashon t'nai. And sometimes the concern is so personal that in order to hold back the maaseh, you have to say what you want to say with the halachot of mishpatei atnaim, right? So it might be that you don't need, even if you say that if the man doesn't have koach gavra, it's still not a mekach ta'ut, because women because there's still kiruv basar, and there's all these there's all these other reasons to get married, right? Social reasons, Yerusha reasons, who knows why, right? So there's other reasons to get married. So this does not make a mekach taut. But it also is pretty clear that it doesn't make for a happy marriage either. So if the woman says, or it's stipulated, even not the lashon t'nai, but just stipulated, there's a hakpada, so that should be enough, right? So maybe the iskur in the ketubah is enough of a gilui dat, the way Tosfot says, the Tosfot in Kiddushin on Daf Memtet that we saw at the time, right? So I think that the ketubah argument might not be so strange. To say that ketubah is like a t'nai is not such a strange argument if you accept Tosfot's approach to t'naim. Okay?
I still don't understand why it's not approaching it from a woman's side. Do you think when women want to get married, they want to get married so they can have children? I find it hard to believe.
So under that, yeah.
Women would marry anyone, even if she knew at the beginning she had
here's
no
the problem.
chance of having children.
If you take a look at the next tshuva, okay. Hold on to that thought for a second. When he says, I just want to relate to some other point that he makes first, but don't forget what you just said. So he says that if you say that if he doesn't have kol gabra, it's a mekach tos because of what it says in the ksuba. So if the husband can't hold down a job, it's also mekach tos because of what it says in the ksuba. So what's the difference? The difference is you have to distinguish. There's certain things which are central to the ishut, and certain things which are the mechuyavut that the husband has, and if he can't fulfill his mechuyavut, so it's as he says, it's onus rechona patre. Person tries his best to make a living, can't make a living. It may be grounds you can think. She can say, I can't be married to this lo yutzlach anymore. He doesn't make a living, so maybe Beit will force him to give a get. But it's certainly nobody would say that that's a mekach taut, right? You were always a lo yutzlach. Your mother said you were lo yutzlach. Your teacher in second grade said you were lo yutzlach. He was lo yutzlach at the time. Right? That's still not good enough, right? But so that's with regards to mizonot, and that's with regard to ksut. But it's not with regards to ona, right? So his argument there also, I think, is not so strong. Okay, it's clear that ona is a much more central aspect to ishut than mizonot. Okay. Now, with regards to women getting married because they want to have children, and that should be a central aspect of it. So let's take a look at this next tshuva. This is a tshuva of the Shvuti Akov. Okay, I have a little bio here. Okay. These stories, one story is like worse than the next. What?
This Tashbek that we read, what year is Tashbek there?
He's in the 14th, 15th century. Okay, Spain. He was in Spain, then he lived in Algeria. He went back and forth. Okay. Okay, so let's see the Shvuti Akov. As I was saying, this one story is worse than the next. B'davar ma'aseh shaya ka'achaya, bachur echad nasa lebetula, achat bat ktsinei va'ashirei aretz. Right? He married a girl with a lot of yichus. Okay? Va'achar chatunata yamim, yamim lo kabir, shortly after the wedding, nafal ktata ben ish li ishto, b'tanat yisha'en al beito v'lo ya'amod. Okay? She'en lo gvurat anashim. V'hu saris. V'abal ratza lefaisa. V'lo nitpaisa b'kach. V'lo nitpaisa. B'chein ya'atz et atzmo lefi darko. V'alach v'nasoa hanegba. V'terem nesiato amar lekam anashim shedato la'archik nidod. Right? He was humiliated by this whole thing. He's going to disappear. V'shei b'val yireh bal yimatzei. Ayeh ve'efo mekom chanayato, kein amar, vayihi vayelech mipnei abusha, v'zeh kmo 5 shanim shene'elam min ha'ayin. Right? V'lo yada mekomo, v'hi yoshevet aguna v'galmuda, v'kvar darshu v'chaku achara, v'lo noda mimenu klal, ki ne'evad shemo v'zichro. Okay?
This guy's a storyteller.
What?
He's a real storyteller. This is like...
I know, you read it like you don't want to put it down, like 3 o'clock in the morning, you're like still reading these tshuvas, right? After yesh, okay. Sheyesh lisha edut brura, shu eino ish klal, shu sris gamur, shekvar shakdu chachamim al takanat agunot, im yesh lam tsi heter v'lomar shebetaut nitkatsha, ומקחה מקח טעות. כי הדייתא דהכי לא נתקדשה, ותהיה מותרת בלא גט. Right? אך מאין חככים למרבד כי היי עובדה. Who's wise enough to paskin this? Ilav mar de gavarabba. Okay, so they sent it to him. Okay? So he did not cooperate. Right? This is a major source l'chumra. Shuva, after taridna la'eta tatuva mikoma komishum tekanot ha'igun is dakakti l'shelatcha v'lo matzati trufa l'makata. V'had dekan l'shum aguna hekelu. Right? So that's only mishum de isha daiku minsaba, and that doesn't apply here. Okay? And he says, goes through the...
Wait, what is that condition?
Isha daiku minsaba, when it says aguna hekelu is a dut shemet ba'ala. Right? A dut shemet ba'ala, your requirements are much less severe than they normally would be. You allow psulei dut, you allow one aid, you allow certain circumstantial evidence because of isha daiku minsaba. Okay? She won't get married again until she herself is satisfied with the evidence. And you take that, plus that umdana, plus the minimal evidence that you have, and with that, you matir the Eshet Ish without two Eidim. Okay? But that's only in that case. Okay? But you don't have Isha Daiko Minsaba here. Okay? There's nothing to be Mivarer. Okay? So he claims that because of Isha B'chol Dehu Nechala, right? Here we have, go down a few lines. Chazaka, okay, the Kamal Ha'ish Shahayu Bamumin, like 6 lines down, 6 lines down, 6 lines in the middle of the line. The first word on the line is mitpayes, yeah? Sha'ish shaya b'mumim o noldu bo de'ein kofin lahotzi mishum de'itata b'chol dehu nechala v'kach katav agot ashri, etc. Right? V'amor lecha sham katav de'ein mevatel ha'mekach levatel ha'kiddushin legamri. Okay, you can't be mevatel the kiddushin based on this. Okay?
He's invoking here
that tavlamate of tandu, right?
So even.
But she's not tandu. Meaning,
Yeah.
if we really believe that women all want to be married, we should assume that no woman would marry a guy who would run off and leave her.
Oh no, the running off was not part of his embedded
I
in
know
his.
he ran off because he was embarrassed by the
Right.
but I'm saying, if our claim is that women will marry anyone,
Right.
why? This should be a very simple end. Meaning, I'm willing to go. Women want to marry anyone, and
Yeah.
therefore, if they knew at the time of the wedding that the guy would run off and never be found, they would never
No. But that doesn't
marry.
exist at the time of the wedding. The mum has to exist at the time.
That he's a schmo, that he'd leave her?
Being a schmo is not good enough,
Did he
right? Being a schmo is not good enough. Okay.
But Saris is existing.
The Sarises exist, right? But she would rather be married to a Saris. He talks about the Puravu. And hold on. Then let's go on first. Hold on. So he says, I'm skimming down. It's a very funny way of looking at it. He says, V'im kain. If you go, the first word on the line is divrei rush. Okay? Okay, so v'im kain, name du adim b'saris, the lo bai get. Right? Say that we didn't know about it, and therefore saris should need a get because of mekach taut. Im mishum ha lo area. Oh, because the Gemara says the other way around, that if a man marries a woman, it turns out she's an ailonit, that she can't have children, so it's a mekach taut and doesn't need a get. Right? So he says, so it goes both ways. So if he's a saris, you shouldn't need a get. Right? So what does he say? Im mishum ha lo area dedafka ba'ailonit sha'ish b'vaday makpid lefi shehu mitzuvel puravu. Al kain avi mekach taut, ma she'en ken isha she'inam mitzuvel puravu, hadrinam leklalin de'itda b'chol du nechala v'lo havi mekach taut. It's very strange, right? They made the woman into the isha halacha, right? That the reason, whether the person is makpid, right, depends upon what they're mitzuvah in. As if a woman would only be makpid that she's marrying Saris because she wants to have children, but she would only want children because she's chayevet in puravu. So since she's not chayevet in puravu, she's not makpid, right?
She's chayev to get her own, so she would be makpid on that.
Whatever. You don't have to.
I do. Like, it's too integral to listen. Like, I don't know why.
So he's starting. It's basically he doesn't want to allow the bittul of the kiddushin because of tablamet of tabdu. That's his
what I'm
right.
bothered by is he takes a principle and he's not even thinking about what the principle means. It's like one thing if
okay.
It undermines the very basis of the principle that he's interested in applying. That's what I don't understand. One thing that I disagree with the principle, but let's accept the principle. So what does it mean that they say women would want to be married? What does it mean that they'll accept anyone? We have to think about what that means and not just say randomly applying it. I
They
can't even
thought
believe
that
in these times a woman would
that she'd rather be an aguna than have a
And the question is, if at the time, right? So I don't know.
at the time of her marriage, it's like the
That's
man
how he
just-
analyzed.
when
That's
you're
how he
splitting up
analyzed
into
his
this
reality, and then it becomes a question of sociology, anthropology, right?
So you're telling
So
me
let-
you think in the 1700s.
I think that he thought in the 1700s. That's for sure. That she would nechala at the time
She
nechala.
would rather be an aguna.
No, she would rather be married at the time when she's accepting the kiddushin. She's accepting it
Knowing
even
that
that had she known, she still would have accepted.
She'd rather be married to a Cerise than not married at all.
Correct. She'd rather be married to a Saris.
I mean, his psychological state should be relevant, and this is
Yeah.
obviously a person whose psychological state is such that having been embarrassed would run off. So that was something that did exist at the time of the marriage.
Right, you could make that claim. That didn't hold for him, right? Because you're taking a more materialistic view of human personality, right? That there's something embedded in the personality now, right? Because you're like post-Freud, you're Freud, where everything is biology, right? You're logical, positive, everything. I know you, so that's what you're thinking, right? But if you believed in Bechira Chavshis, right? So there's nothing, like he could have done anything, right? So it's not embedded as a mum in the personality. Okay? I have to agree with you, right? But that's not the argument. But that's not the argument that he's making.
We have
Okay?
a few chuvot in which women, the second they find out that their husbands can't either get it up or castrated, they immediately complain. So I still don't understand the idea of making a general statement about what women want when it's
I agree with you.
obvious.
It's really very disturbing. It really is.
I agree. That's why Rav Moshe, which we'll come to, that's why Rav Moshe is so important. And he's so willing to say it.
What
Okay?
was the source that we read about when the question of if he was Yorek case, we believed her? What was that case that we read a few weeks ago? Where it was clear that she was amended on that type of situation. What was that scenario?
I don't remember. I don't remember what you're referring to.
We read it here. No?
Could be. Could be it came up some in passing. I don't remember. Okay, let's take a look here. There are two chuvot of the Marami Rutenberg. The Marami Rutenberg is willing to. His attitude is more mekil. Okay, it's very hard for them to be matir l'maisa, but his attitude is more l'kula. Okay, Narashin it arsala v'achur. לבחור אחד, ולא ראתהו מעולם, ולאחר אירוסין נודע שהוא עיוור. אוקיי? לפי דעתי, אם לא ידעה מום זה, שבבחור קידושי טעות הן, אוקיי? אף על פי שלא היו קידושים בתנאי, תחי היכד אמרינן גבי דידי, עד שלא אסתיך והיה מקרי מקח טעות, right? Hachanami ikalamemer gabe dida da adaita da hachi lo nitkatsha lo. Okay? V'chol mekach taut de shayach. This is a very important phrase. V'chol mekach taut de shayach b'mekach umemkar shayach nami b'kiddushin bein b'didei bein b'dida. Okay? The dafko mumin shayubo v'yad'a a masavra v'kabila. Only woman that he had, and we say that she knew about it, do we assume that she accepted them. Afilu hachi ikalaman de amash yichola lamar svura sheiti yichola lekabel. Right? Aval heicha de lo yada'a de lekala meimer savra v'kabila v'lo chalu kiddushin v'hadam isha b'choldu nechala. What do you do with that? Dafka halach etzel rofei urifa'o o etzel chacham v'hitir. Aval kozman shelo nirpa. This is as opposed to what the Tashbit said. Maybe it'll get better, right? Kozman shelo nirpa kol heicha de'ika kpeda kpedat mum lo chalu akiddushin. Right? Somebody finally says something like straight. Yeah.
It seems like a non sequitur. Like, how does that address the hazak?
Oh, the point is like this. You could have said that since he's mitrapeh, right? She could say it's still a mekach taut. Why? Because at the time, and I don't even want to have this memory as part of my relationship with this person, right? It's true they're better now, but at the time that he fooled me, I don't want to be married to him, right? So that you say isha nechala b'koldahu. Right, that you don't say that's a mekach taut because he was able to get better. So it wasn't the type of mum which constitutes a taut, and she's willing to live with the fact that the person wasn't honest and that the person had some sort of temporary mum at the time, and the fact that it's better that she's willing to live with it, even though she says she doesn't want to live with it. Right? Maybe that would be grounds for forcing a get. Right? That's kfiyat get. That's a different story. But in terms of mekach taut, it's not a mekach taut. That's what the Gemara is saying. That's what he's saying. He's limiting, he's doing a job on the Gemara, right? Okay, fine.
But isn't it in this situation?
Hold on one second, what? What? Yeah.
It's erusin, it's between erusin and kiddushin.
Yeah.
So, it makes sense that he's more mekil here, because there isn't yet kiddushin.
No, erusin is kiddushin. It's between erusin and chuppah.
Right,
She's an Eshet Gemura. It says, how could she know that how could she not know that he was an Iver? Because the Kiddushin was through a Shaliach, right? And then came time for the Nisuin, and the guy showed up and he was an Iver.
So it's before Nisuin.
Yes, but she's an Eshet Ish,
does
right?
it make a difference if it was after Nisuin?
Not at all.
The tshuva would be the same.
The tshuva would be the same, right? Okay. Unless you would say that Savra V'Kabla, that then she saw it and she accepted it, where the Rambam says, right? That could be a claim. Like, how come you're waking? And then 2 months later, she said, and he's blind. Like, hello, right? So that's okay. But then what he does is, because this guy did not run away, he backtracks and he says, "Al kol zot eini omer lo tzia b'lo get." Right, and this is grounds for forcing a get. That's where he goes. He works it out that Beit Din should force a get.
Not
right?
suffering.
Right. In other words, if he had run away, then Then it sounds like he would have been willing to say mekach tos, right? But given the fact that he's here, so why should he be so mech on mekach taut and get into this whole thing about matir and eshet ish la'alma lo get? When when you have the option that there should be a get, so better that should be a get. That's always, if there's an option to force a get, so you force a get. So he was matir theoretically, but what later poskim have difficulty with, for instance, why shouldn't the Shvuti Yaakov be somech on this? Because the Marambi Rutenberg wasn't matir halacha l'maisa based on mekach tos. You don't have that. He would have, maybe, it sounds like, right? But it's not as conclusive, right? Because he had other considerations. So he was matir, but he was matir al yidei get. Okay? The next tshuva is a case of chalitza. Okay? The case was as follows. Right? Ana horeinu derech yishara. This is old Marami Rutenberg. Alodot shomeret yavam, v'hu mishumad lahachis. Right? So the yavam is a mishumad. Okay? Va'aduk la'avodah zara mamash, and he's from on top of it. Okay? Va'yivama nafla lefanav, ve'ein ach elahu. ורצתה לתת לו הון רב כדי לחלוץ לה, ולא אהבה לקחת כלל, כי אמר בפה מלא שלא היה חפץ להחזיק אמונת היהודים. אוקיי? והנה, זה לשם שמיים, אוקיי? והנה יבמה זו ניסתה כמה פעמים, היחלוץ לה ולא אהבה, ומאין בה לעשות, והיא ישבה כך עגונה ימים ושנים. לסוף, קלקלה שנבעלה לגויים וילדה לזנונים. לסוף הלכה, so she held out for a long time.